Daniel, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I appreciate it. Can I ask a favor for one of the organizers? Can we turn on the lights? Because in a room like this, I think it's much more productive to do this as a conversation rather than as a diatribe. And what I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking to you guys about today is how to get to the point where Sasha was talking. And I think he put on a phenomenal presentation. Sasha, are you still here? Yeah. Great job. Wasn't he excellent? But I think what you'll hear over the course of this conversation is not a contrast, but how a corporate and branding communications approach can complement one that's born in politics. And I think what I can do for you, what I hope I can do for you over the course of this conversation, is to get you from where you are now to where Sasha very appropriately wants you to be. Because what I sensed in some of your questions was not skepticism, not at all, but a little bit of concern as to how do I get people to listen to that message as Sasha presented to me. And one of the things that we do in politics, whether it's at a local, or state, or the national level, is we figure out how to get people to listen, how to engage them in conversation, how to prepare them, how to seed the field so they can be prepared to listen to the type of branding that Sasha had to offer you. So maybe in a perfect world, we would have done this in reverse. I could have started out by talking to you a little bit about how to engage the audience and bring them into a discussion about Israel, its safety, its security, and peace and prosperity in the Middle East. And then bring in Sasha to close the deal with the kind of branding that he very, very effectively provided for you. Let me start this discussion with a premise. A premise that you're...
Sorry, go back a little bit, the mic won't feedback, and we can make you louder.
Okay, even better. Oh, it'll just sit. Let me start with the premise, and it's a premise that you guys may or may not agree with. Let me suggest to you that you are not normal. I know you've only been in this room for about an hour, but let me give you an update. It is a beautiful Sunday afternoon in Southern California outside. It is 70 degrees, the birds are singing, the sun is shining. I drove here along the ocean, the surfers are out in force. It's an amazing Southern California day. It's the kind of day that made me move here from Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin, a zillion years ago. And here you are, sitting in a semi-darkened room, listening to me. Now, I guess what I'd suggest from that is that that does not reflect the general tendencies and the overall preferences of a greater Los Angeles population. Most people, most normal people wouldn't be in this room. They'd be at the beach. So you're not normal, and neither am I. But let me suggest to you that you're not normal in the very best of ways. You're not normal because you care. You care deeply, you care passionately about a country and a cause. And the very last question that Sasha was asked from a gentleman in the back here. What was your name? Michael. Michael's a great question. Thank you. Most people don't care. And one of the great challenges we have as communicators, whether we're communicating on behalf of a candidate, or an issue, or a cause, or a country, is to remember that most people don't care. At least they don't care as much as we do. Of course people care. People care if there's peace in the Middle East. People care if there's war and bloodshed. People care about whether this Arab Spring really does lay the groundwork for democracy in prosperity in a part of the world that has never known it. Of course people care. But they don't care as much as we do. And what that means is that gives you, you and your, I guess, not normal is a little bit harsh, isn't it? How about special? No, that doesn't do it either. We'll go with unique. So for a unique individual like yourself, who's giving of your time and of yourself on this beautiful Sunday afternoon in Southern California, what comes with that is a special responsibility. And that is not just to care, but to realize that when you're communicating a message on behalf of Israel, on behalf of its people, on behalf of its safety and its security and peace in the Middle East, you have to remember that most people aren't going to devote several hours to a conversation about Israel the way you are today. Most people aren't even going to devote several minutes to a conversation about Israel. So the first premise I want to start with, to your last question of Sasha, is to realize, to set an achievable goal. And that goal is not to make people care as much as you and I do. It's to make people care more than they already do. If you try to make them care as much as we do, you're going to fail. Because if they cared as much as we did, they'd already be in this room with us. Don't try to get them to care as much as you do. Get them to care more than they already do. Because most people, those people who don't care as much as we do, they're not stupid. They're not lazy. They're busy. Just like you and I, we're busy. And just like you and me, we all set priorities in our lives. What's important to us? Our jobs, our families, our school. We decide what's important when there's a little bit of time left over. What do we devote it to? Do we have a favorite TV show? Do we go to the movies? Do we go to the beach? Do we have a favorite sport? Do we sing? What do we do? Different people have different things. For you and me, one of those things, maybe the most important of those things, is Israel. But for most people, it's not. So the first step in communicating a message on behalf of Israel is realizing that we're going to be communicating that message to an audience that gives us a relatively limited window of opportunity. Your window, like I said, is several hours wide. People like Sasha and me, okay, maybe not me, but people like Sasha could talk to you for hours about Israel and what makes it such a special place. Most people's windows of opportunities aren't like this. They're like this. It's the reason most TV commercials are only 30 seconds long. And so what we have to be cognizant of, what we have to realize when we're reaching out to communicate to a broader community, to a broader audience on behalf of Israel, is that most people don't care, comma. At least they don't care as much as we do. And so what I want to talk to you about today are three things. I want to talk to you about the message we deliver on behalf of Israel. I want to talk to you about the audience to whom we deliver that message. And finally, I want to talk to you about the messenger or messengers who can most effectively deliver that message. So I'm going to start. I'm actually going to go a little bit out of order, given the kind of questions I heard you raising a few minutes ago. I'm going to start with the audience that we're going to be talking to, and then from there to the message that we can deliver, and then finally the messengers who can deliver it. So let me start by talking about audience. In my world, in my former world, as a campaign manager, in my world, there are three kinds of people. And the three kinds of people are as follows. In my world, there are saints, there are sinners, and there are salvageables. And I'm going to take just a moment to define my terms because this is political, not religious terminology. A saint is somebody who agrees with me, no matter what, under all circumstances. And I know that in the statewide election in California or in a national campaign that roughly 40% of the voters, by that very narrow definition, are saints. That they're going to vote for my party or my party's candidates under almost any circumstances. And both Barack Obama and whoever emerges as his Republican opponent are going to start next year's campaign with about 40% of the electorate in the bag. Now, of course, one person's saints are another sinners. And if 40% of the audience, if 40% of the electorate is going to agree with me no matter what, that means 40% of that audience is going to disagree with me no matter what. Now, again, this is very narrow terminology. A saint, somebody who supports me, isn't necessarily a good person. They're just a political saint. And a sinner, again, a very, very narrow term, is not a bad person. They're not an evil person. They're just someone, no matter how much time or energy or oxygen I expend, is never, ever going to support me or my candidate or my cause. Let me explain to you exactly how narrow a term sinner is. My younger brother, Jonathan, is an otherwise very bright young man who spent 7 years working in the Clinton-Gore administration. As you might guess by the term otherwise bright young man, you might guess that I voted in the other direction. I love him. My brother is one of the most phenomenal people on this earth. Politically, he's a sinner. His son, his oldest son, Matthew, my nephew, who's 6 years old, Matthew says Barack Obama like it's a magic word, like abracadabra. Kid's a sinner. My dad and my stepmom, just wonderful, wonderful people. They raised me. I love them more than any two people on this planet. They used the V-chip on our TV set back at home to block out the Fox News channel. Sinners. So again, I think you understand what I'm saying here. It's very, very narrow terminology. Wonderful, wonderful people. But no matter how hard I try, I'm never going to get them to vote for my candidate. No matter how hard they try, they're never going to get me to vote for theirs. So if 40% of our audience are saints and 40% of the electorate are sinners, what that means is the middle 20% of the electorate are salvageables. And in a political, in a campaign context, this means that these voters are either independent voters, as we call them in California, declined estates, or relatively moderate Democrats, a relatively moderate Republican, somebody who might vote for Dianne Feinstein, or a relatively centrist Democrat, somebody who might have voted for Arnold Schwarzenegger, at least up until a few months ago. But what a salvageable voter is it's someone who's displayed a willingness to vote for a candidate of either party. An individual who comes into the conversation without having made up their mind first. And reaching out to that sector of our audience is the difference between victory and defeat. Now, when we're delivering a message on behalf of Israel, rather than on behalf of a political candidate, the stakes aren't quite as stark. It's not like we have to get 51% of the vote on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November for Israel to win, and if we don't, Israel loses. It's a lot more amorphous than that. And I would suggest to you, as was the basis of Mike's question, that we probably don't have a 40-40-20 split in the community when it comes to saints and sinners and salvageables. My gut, and it's just a gut, is that we have probably about a 10% saints, about a 5 to 8% sinners, and all the rest are salvageables. And what that means, Mike, is that most people don't care as much as we do, but as Sasha began to indicate to you in his answer to your question, is they're open for us to reach out to. Now, if there's 3 different kinds of people to talk to about Israel, we talk to them in 3 different ways, because we have 3 different types of goals. If we're talking to saints, we want to motivate them. We know that somebody who agrees with us, or someone who's already going to vote for my candidate, or someone who already believes in the importance of the strength and the security and the safety of the state of Israel, they're on our side. We have to motivate them. It means we have to organize them, we have to inform them, and we have to motivate them. And I'll talk in just a little while about how that can be done. And I think Sasha's branding is an excellent idea, particularly when it comes to motivating our saints. If our goal is to motivate our saints, when it comes to salvageables, we're not trying to motivate them, we're trying to persuade them. And that's an entirely different exercise. I'm not trying to get someone excited, I'm not trying to get someone energized. I'm trying to present them with information that they might not have heard or considered, and then convince them to move from the center, armed with that new information, in our direction. And we'll talk in just a few minutes about how to do that too. But the third group I want to talk about, and I want to spend a couple minutes on this because this is one of the biggest mistakes we make as a Jewish community, is if our goal is to motivate saints, people who agree with us, if our goal is to persuade salvageables, those who haven't made up their mind, when it comes to sinners, our goal, you know what our goal is with sinners? Anyone want to guess? Sorry? Don't waste your time. At best, you pacify the sinners. At least you ignore them. And this is tough for us. This is really tough for us as a well-educated community. You know why? Because it's tempting, whether it's Republicans and Democrats or whether it's pro or anti-Israel, when we are confronted with people who disagree with us, we believe we can convince them. Now, people have tried for years to convince my brother and my dad and my stepmom to change parties. And it's never happened. Year after year, election after election, campaign after campaign, it never happens. But for years, I tried. And why did I try when so many others had tried and failed? Why did I think I could succeed? For I am Dan. And no one has ever tried before like me. No one as smart as me. No one as persuasive as me. No one as eloquent as me has ever tried to convince that sinner and make them a saint. So you know what it is for all of us? It's a little bit of intellectual arrogance. We see that challenge. We see that person who is unconvincible by the rest of humanity, but not by me. I can convince that person. And when I walk across campus at USC and I see the various student groups tabling, I see the SC Students for Israel, who I'm proud to serve as an advisor to. And I see the Students for Truth and Justice in Palestine. And I see them arguing and yelling at each other. And I have never, ever, ever in all my years on campus seen one of those students say, "Holy cow, you're right." Oh my gosh. I feel so silly. Now I've been enlightened. The students can't do it. The candidates can't do it. We can't do it. And any time and energy and oxygen you waste trying to convince someone who by definition can't be convinced is time and energy and oxygen you have wasted that could be put to much better use motivating our saints and persuading those salvageables. So I try. I'm not very good at putting aside intellectual arrogance, as you can tell. But I've learned over the years there's certain things you can do and there's certain things you can't do. I can organize, I can inform, and I can motivate my allies. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes I can persuade people who haven't thought about these things as much as we have. But I'm never, ever going to convince a sinner to become a saint. I'm not that good. And my guess is, no disrespect intended, neither are you. So that's our audience. 3 different audiences and 3 different ways to approach them. Let's talk for a couple minutes then about the message. And the message goes back to a point I was making earlier about the very limited window of opportunity we have with most people, particularly most salvageables. Because saints care deeply, otherwise they wouldn't be sitting in rooms like this one. Sinners care just as deeply as saints do. They're sitting in rooms just like this one somewhere else in Los Angeles. The only difference is that we're right and they're wrong. Who doesn't care? As much as we do, it's the salvageables. And they give us a very small window of opportunity through which to talk. And so in order to craft a message that can fit through that relatively small window, that message needs to have the following characteristics. Number 1, that message needs to be short. I said, you'll give hours for this kind of conversation. Most people won't give minutes. Number 2, that message has to be direct. Too much nuance, too much subtlety for people who aren't giving you their full and complete attention, it's going to be lost on them. And that message needs to be easy to understand, at least at the outset. Because honestly, if people are asked to think about something that they normally think about, it's way too easy for them to change the channel, literally or figuratively. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh my God, this is the most cynical man on the planet. This is why I hate American politics. He is telling us to dumb down the message. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm talking about is not dumbing down a pro-Israel message. What I'm talking about instead, rather than dumbing down, is coming attractions, like at the movie theater. How many of you have been to the movies recently? Naomi, what'd you see?
Smurfs.
You saw the Smurfs. Ah, that's really sweet. Smurfs are saints, by the way. They're cute, they're cuddly, and they're pro-Israel. Smurfs are saints. Okay. And I'm guessing that when you walked into the theater and sat down, the minute you sat in your seat, the music came up, all these weird-looking little blue people appeared on the screen, and the movie was off and running, right? Really? No trailers? No coming attractions? I'm guessing coming attractions. Do you remember what they showed you coming attractions for? NBC programming for next year. Now, did they show you all the programs? Did they show you 30 or 60 minutes of all the shows that they're going to be airing next year? Why not?
Because we would zone out.
Because why?
Zone out.
Because you'd zone out or you'd leave. I mean, if you're there to see the Smurfs, you got a pretty specific goal in mind. And if all of a sudden you're seeing programming for the new Charlie's Angels show or something like that, if you're into Smurfs, you don't want to see Charlie's Angels, or vice versa, I'm getting, but that's another conversation for another day. But you sat through those trailers, you sat through those previews, you sat through those coming attractions because they were short. And what the people who make those trailers know is if they put together a message that's short and easy to understand. And not just short and easy to understand, but interesting and compelling and relevant. Maybe next time you'll come back and you'll see the whole show. That's what we're trying to do too. I can't deliver an entire pro-Israel message to Mike's friends who don't want to hear it all. But if I put together a short and a direct and an easy to understand distillation of that message, if I can summarize it very briefly and very succinctly, and if I can put it to them in a way that is compelling and interesting to them and it's a way that's relevant to their lives, then maybe they'll decide they want to hear more. Maybe they'll go to a website. Maybe they'll come to an event like this one. Maybe they'll come back and see the whole show. So knowing that we don't have as large a window of opportunity for our salvageables as we do for each other, know that that message has to be short, it's got to be direct, it's got to be easy to understand. What's that message? Well, ultimately, once you get to the whole movie, Sasha did a very good job of outlining the branding involved. But I'll offer you a few conversation points to get you from here to there. Because I guess the way I look at the world through a political rather than through a corporate branding lens is I can't just tell people what I want to tell them. I have to recognize what their interests are too. Any of you ever watch the talk shows on TV, the Sunday morning programs or the cable TV political shows? You ever see a politician who does this? Thank you for that question about health care. So I'd like to talk to you about Afghanistan. And they all do it. I swear they were trained in sound stages in suburban Virginia to ignore questions. And they think they're so clever and so slick that they can ignore questions that way. Thank you for that question about abortion. Let me talk to you about job creation. We know what they're doing. They're not fooling anybody, and it's not clear to me why they think they are. And what they're doing is they're skipping all the way to the branding without getting the audience from what the audience is interested in to what the communicator wants to talk about. So I'm going to offer you 3 talking points that do address Israel in the political context before we can talk about cultural and social and other attributes that Sasha laid out for you. And what you're going to notice, and it goes back to a point he made about the importance of message repetition, is that each one of these 3 points begins with exactly the same phrase. Israel wants peace. Israel wants peace. Israel wants peace. Even if you have the most inattentive, short attention span salvageable in the world, that they won't even stay with you for a 30-second message, for a 15-second movie trailer, they'll only stay with you for 3 words. Those are the 3 words that your audience has to hear before any other. Israel wants peace. So let's talk one at a time about what we can do to flesh out that message. Number 1, Israel wants peace and is willing to sacrifice a portion of its homeland in order to achieve that peace. Israel wants peace and is willing to sacrifice a portion of its homeland in order to achieve that peace. And if you get people to come back for more, you can tell them, because I think all of you know this by now, Israel is one Jewish state surrounded by 23 Arab nations. The state of Israel occupies less than 0.1% of the landmass in the greater Middle East and North Africa. And so badly do the people of Israel and their leaders want to end the violence that they're willing to give up a portion, a significant portion of that tiny sliver of territory in order to stop the violence. But that's for the full movie. The short version, Israel wants peace. Israel wants peace so badly that they're willing to give up a portion of their homeland in order to achieve that peace. And if your audience hears nothing other than that, they've left with information that they didn't have before, and you've moved them that much closer from being salvageable to being a saint. Because, of course, what is a saint, of course? Or, excuse me, what is a salvageable, of course? Except a saint who doesn't know it yet. So number 1, Israel wants peace so badly that they're willing to sacrifice a portion of their homeland in order to achieve that peace. Point number 2, Israel wants peace, but needs a willing partner to end the violence. Israel wants peace but needs a willing partner to end the violence. And when you get people, for the longer version of the movie, you can talk to them about what happened when Israel gave back Gaza and how the Palestinians responded with violence and bombing and murder. When you have a chance, when you show them the full movie, you can talk to them about textbooks that Palestinian children read that portray Israelis as the devil incarnate. For the trailer, for the first version of that message, Israel wants peace, but they need a willing partner, and that partner doesn't exist. And third and finally, and this gets to the point of relevance, when people think about the Middle East today, what do they think about? They don't think about Israel. They don't think about the Palestinians. They think about Tunisia. They think about Egypt. They think about Syria. They think about the Arab Spring. And so the third point I would make to you, and this dovetails to some degree with the point that Sasha was making as part of his branding exercise, is this. Israel wants peace. And Israel can be a willing partner with any Arab country that wants to promote democracy and human rights in their own country, the same way the Israelis do in theirs. Any country in the Middle East, any Arab nation that wants to promote democracy and human rights the way Tunisia does, the way that Egypt is trying to, Israel is willing to help. That's how badly the people of Israel want peace and human rights and democracy in the Middle East. Now, I want to talk briefly and then wind this up. Having talked about the audience and about the message, I want to talk for just a couple minutes about the most effective messengers to deliver this message. Most effective messengers to deliver this message are you. Why? Because you're not normal. Because you care so much about this country and this cause that you're willing to give of your time and of your energy and of yourselves to sit in a room like this one listening to the likes of me. And that, by definition, makes you a capable and a qualified and a credentialed messenger. You know what else makes you a capable messenger? You know what else makes you an effective messenger? Your experience, your life experience, your biography. How many people in this room have been to Israel? That's slightly more than half. How many people in this room during your trips to Israel have talked to Israeli men, women, or children who have suffered from or seen violence? Still almost everybody. How many of you came back from Israel with, if not a different opinion, a different appreciation for the challenges of achieving peace in the Middle East? Almost all of you. And what that means is your biography, your experience, makes you a credible messenger to people who haven't had the benefit of that experience. Let me tell you what your biography does. It gives you three things. First and most importantly, it gives you credibility. Anybody can promise anything. Anybody can assert or postulate anything. But if you've been there, if you've seen it, if you've heard it with your own eyes and ears, you have credibility that the average person in this conversation will not have. Let me give you an example. What's your name? Yes? Rachel. Okay, let's say, for the sake of argument, that Rachel and I are running against each other for the school board. And let me tell you a little bit about the two candidates before you. Rachel was born in this community. She was raised here. She attended the schools in this community. After she graduated from college, she came back and she taught in our public schools. Now, after that, she invented a piece of social networking software that has made her fabulously, ridiculously, obscenely wealthy. Way to go, Rachel. And she started a business that's been tremendously successful, but even running that business, she hires graduates of our local schools and provides internships and scholarships to the students in our schools. That's Rachel, and that's her candidacy. I'm running against Rachel. I just moved here. I grew up in Wisconsin, and I went to private school there. Why? Because back where I come from, you don't go to public school unless you really have to, you know what I mean? I've never actually been inside the public schools in this community. But you know what? I watch Glee, and I watch Gossip Girl, and I gotta believe that the schools in our community have a lot of the same problems as the schools in those television shows. So if you elect me, I will get rid of Sue Sylvester, and I will make our schools all they can be. Who are you going to vote for, me or for Rachel? Come on, even I'm going to vote for Rachel. Now, why am I going to vote for her? Because she has credibility. Her personal experience, where she grew up, where she went to school, the fact that she taught, the fact that she's so invested in our schools gives her credibility and believability. That even before you know where we stand on the issues, you're willing to believe what she has to say. And when you go talk to an audience, whether it's an audience of 1,000 or of 1, and you tell them about your own experience, your trip to Israel, who you met, what you learned, what you saw, what you heard, how it changed you, that gives you the same kind of credibility in this conversation that Rachel gets in her conversation about education in our communities. Second, quickly, your biography, your experience allows you to establish an emotional connection with the people you're talking to. You're not just some messaging robot reciting talking points. You're somebody who has something in common with the person you're talking to. Now, this aspect of your biography might not have been your visit to Israel. Maybe you live in the same neighborhood. Maybe you have the same type of job. Maybe your kids play together. Maybe you have mutual friends. Maybe you have the same hobbies. But anybody who you're talking to, anybody, is someone that you have something in common with. And what an effective communicator can do is figure out what's that common ground and use that commonality to forge an emotional connection. So they're going to be that much more likely to listen to you than to someone arguing the other side. You're going to listen to Rachel. Why? Because you grew up in this community too. Because you attended the schools in this community too. Because your kids attend those schools just like all 14 of her children do. Way to go, Rachel. She has something in common with you, and therefore you're more likely to listen to what she has to say. And finally, your biography is important because it shows people what's important to you. It shows them what your priorities are. And this comes back all the way full circle. You're not suggesting that your priorities are any more important than theirs. You're simply saying, here's what's important to me and why. This is why I've devoted time to this. This is why I've devoted attention to this. This is why I've spent some time thinking about this. And given what you and I have in common, I hope you'll give a little bit of time to thinking about it too. This isn't an easy task. Because as Mike said somewhat earlier, most people don't care about this stuff, and they don't care about it as much as we do. But what you can do, if you care, and if you're willing to put in the time and the effort, and if you're willing to talk to a lot of people who don't have the same amount of attention and energy and patience for the subject as you do, if you're willing to put yourself in their shoes, if you're willing to frame a message that can bring them into a conversation, that can bring them back to a point where they want to come back and see the whole movie, that makes you as effective a messenger on behalf of the state of Israel as exists. And however you decide to pursue that goal, I wish you the best of luck. And any way I can help you along the way, just let me know. Thanks very much.